My mother-in-law, Carol, swept into the wedding chapel like she was the main event. A vision in a floor-length, lace-covered, pure white dress. It even had a small train. It wasn't just a white dress, it was a wedding gown, a deliberate, screaming statement of defiance. A wave of shocked whispers followed her as she took her seat in the front row, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She was glowing, absolutely soaking in the attention, convinced she had stolen my spotlight. I met her gaze from the back of the chapel, where I was waiting to walk down the aisle. I didn't scowl. I didn't let a single tear fall. I just smiled, a small private smile that didn't reach my eyes. Then I lifted my hand slightly and signaled our wedding coordinator, Sarah, who was standing by the control booth. Sarah gave me a subtle nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. A moment later, a large projection screen, which everyone assumed was for a photo slideshow during the reception, hummed to life above the altar. Carol thought she was the star of my wedding, but what she didn't know was that I had already cast her in a very different role. She was about to be the main character in her own public downfall. You might be wondering why I'd turn my own wedding into a stage for revenge. Why would I orchestrate such a public spectacle on a day that was supposed to be about love? To understand that, you have to understand the woman who spent 5 years trying to break me. It all started the first time I met her. My husband, Mark, had been the light of my life from the day we met. He was kind, supportive, and saw me for who I was, not who my family had trained me to be. But the moment he brought me home to meet his mother, I felt a familiar coldness settle in my stomach. Carol looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple dress, a gift from Mark. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You must be the little project Mark's been working on." In her eyes, I wasn't his partner, I was a charity case. And her daughter, Chloe, was the golden child, the standard against which I would always fall short. From that first meeting, Carol made it her mission to highlight every perceived difference between me and her perfect daughter, Chloe. Family dinners became a minefield of passive aggression. Chloe would talk about her latest luxury vacation or a new designer bag, and Carol would clap her hands in delight, calling her savvy and brilliant. Then all eyes would turn to me. "And what have you been up to, dear?" Carol would ask, her voice laced with pity. "Still working at that little computer company?" The truth was, I wasn't just working at a little computer company. I owned it. After years of grinding, my software development firm was quietly becoming a major player in the tech industry, but I never flaunted it. I believe in quiet success. To them, however, my modesty was proof of my mediocrity. They didn't want to know the details. They had already written my story. I was the drab, uninteresting girl from a working-class background who had somehow tricked their wonderful Mark into loving her. The insults grew bolder over time. For our first Christmas together, I spent weeks putting together a custom photo album for Carol, filled with pictures of Mark's childhood that I had carefully restored. When she opened it, she gave it a cursory glance and set it aside without a word. A moment later, she unwrapped Chloe's gift, an absurdly expensive coffee machine, and burst into performative tears. "Oh, Chloe, you know me so well. You have such impeccable taste." My gift was forgotten. Later that evening, as I was helping clear the dishes, I overheard Carol talking to her sister in the hallway. Can you believe it? A photo album. It's the kind of cheap, sentimental thing poor people think is a good gift. Mark tried his best to defend me, but he was caught in the middle. He'd say, "Mum, that's not fair," or "Please be nicer to her." But he was conditioned by a lifetime of her behaviour. He saw it as her being difficult, while I saw it for what it was, a systematic campaign to erode my confidence and push me out of the family. The final straw, the moment I knew I couldn't just endure it anymore, came when we announced our engagement. Chloe, of course, had gotten engaged to some finance bros 6 months prior, and Carol had thrown them a lavish party that was the talk of her social circle. When we shared our news, Carol's face fell. She forced a tight smile and said, "Oh, that's nice. I just hope you're not expecting a big wedding. With Chloe's wedding this year, we've just about tapped out our resources. You'll have to be a bit more practical."
Practical. That was the word she used to put me in my place. She wanted me to have a small, forgettable wedding in a courthouse basement so that Chloe's extravagant affair would remain the unchallenged social event of the year. Mark was furious, but I just smiled calmly. "That's perfectly fine, Carol," I said, my voice even. "Mark and I wouldn't dream of being a financial burden. We'll handle everything ourselves." The look on her face was priceless. She had expected me to be disappointed, to beg for a bigger budget. Instead, I had cheerfully cut her primary source of control right out from under her. By refusing to need her money, I had taken away her power. She couldn't object, of course. How could she argue against such a reasonable, generous offer? All she could do was nod, her smile looking more like a grimace. From that moment on, since she couldn't control the budget, she tried to control everything else. She criticized the venue we chose, a beautiful historic estate, saying it was a bit pretentious for your background. She second-guessed our menu, our guest list, and our choice of music. Every conversation began with, "Well, at Chloe's wedding, we did it this way." It was exhausting, but I saw it for what it was, the desperate flailing of a woman who was losing her grip. I let her think she was getting to me. I would nod thoughtfully and say, "That's an interesting point, Carol. I'll consider it." Then I would immediately tell our wedding coordinator, Sarah, to proceed exactly as planned. The idea for the white dress was planted about 2 months before the wedding. Carol, Chloe, and I were having a tense lunch, supposedly to discuss flower arrangements. "You know," Carol said wistfully, "the dress I wore to Chloe's wedding was just magnificent. A custom-made champagne silk gown. I felt like a queen." She then looked me dead in the eye. "It's a shame your wedding is so close to hers. It feels like a rerun. Maybe I should just wear that dress again to save myself the trouble of finding something new." I knew then and there what she was going to do. She wasn't just going to wear an off-white or champagne dress. She was going to find the most bridal-looking gown she could get away with. It was the ultimate power move in her mind, a final public declaration that I was the second-rate wife, the consolation prize. I just took a sip of my iced tea and said, "You should wear whatever makes you feel comfortable, Carol." Inside, the gears of my own plan began to turn with cold, precise clicks. The day after that lunch, I called Sarah, my wedding coordinator. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I'm upgrading our package. I want the premium AV setup, including the large projection screen, and I need to hire one of your tech guys to run a presentation for me during the ceremony." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "During the ceremony?" she asked, a note of concern in her voice. "That's unconventional." I then spent the next 10 minutes explaining the last 5 years of Carol's relentless campaign against me. I told her about the insults, the sabotage, and the constant comparisons to Chloe. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this for 15 years, she said finally, her voice now hard as steel. "I thought I'd seen it all, but your mother-in-law is a piece of work. Forget the upgrade fee. Consider it my wedding gift. Whatever you need, I've got your back." With Sarah as my ally, the plan came together beautifully. For years, I had been quietly documenting Carol's abuse. Not for revenge initially, but for my own sanity. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that this was real. I had screenshots of vicious text messages, saved voicemails of her backhanded compliments, and even a few audio recordings from my phone when I knew a family dinner was about to turn ugly. But the real bombshell, the ace up my sleeve, came about a month before the wedding. Chloe called me, sobbing hysterically. Her lavish lifestyle was a house of cards. Her influencer career was a joke, and she was drowning in credit card debt, on the verge of bankruptcy. She begged me for a loan, a significant one, to bail her out, making me swear I wouldn't tell Mark or her parents, especially her mother, who would be devastated by her failure. I agreed. I transferred the $50,000 to her account, but not before I had her sign a formal loan agreement. an agreement that explicitly stated the funds came from my little computer company. I now had irrefutable proof that the golden child, whose success was the stick Carol used to beat me with, was secretly being kept afloat by the charity case. I compiled everything into a slick, damning PowerPoint presentation. The texts, the audio clips, and the final beautiful slide showing the signed loan agreement with Chloe. I gave the file to Sarah's tech guy with a single instruction. When you see me signal Sarah during the processional, start the presentation on a loop. And so, we arrive back at the beginning. I stood at the back of the chapel, hidden from most of the guests, watching Carol preen in the front row. Her white dress was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a final, desperate attempt to claim a day that wasn't hers. She caught my eye and gave me a condescending little wink, as if to say, "Checkmate." She had no idea that the game she was playing was over before it even began, and I had been the one controlling the board the entire time. My father took my arm, his face a mixture of pride and confusion about the delay. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" he whispered. I squeezed his arm reassuringly and looked over his shoulder to Sarah, who was standing by the tech booth, headset on, waiting. I gave her the nod. The lights in the chapel dimmed slightly. The large screen flickered on, bathing the room in a soft, white light. A title appeared in elegant script. "A Tribute to a Mother's Love." A few guests murmured in appreciation. Carol herself looked up, a look of smug satisfaction spreading across her face. She probably thought Mark had prepared a touching surprise for her. A beautiful, professionally shot photo of Carol appeared on screen, smiling warmly. Then, her own voice filled the chapel, crisp and clear through the expensive sound system. It was an audio clip from a voicemail she'd left for her sister a year ago, a voicemail I had saved. "Honestly, I don't know what he sees in her," Carol's voice echoed, dripping with disdain. "She has no family, no background, no ambition. You watch, she's just after his money. We have to be so careful." An audible gasp went through the crowd. Heads began to turn from the screen to the front row, where Carol's smile had frozen and was quickly melting into a rictus of horror. Before she could react, the slide changed. It was a screenshot of a text message she had sent to Chloe, blown up for all to see. It read, "Just had dinner with the little project. Had to bite my tongue for 2 hours. God, she is so painfully boring. The wedding will be a tasteless, cheap affair, I'm sure of it." The whispers grew louder. People were pulling out their phones. Carol's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. She looked from the screen to Mark, who stood at the altar looking utterly stunned, and then to the back of the chapel, her eyes finally finding mine. I held her gaze, my expression perfectly neutral, and began my walk down the aisle. My walk down the aisle was the most surreal experience of my life. The traditional wedding march played softly, but it was punctuated by the venomous words flashing on the screen and the horrified gasps of our guests. Another slide appeared, a split screen showing the lavish praise Carol had posted on social media about Chloe's impeccable taste, next to a picture of the insulting dollar store cookbook she had given me for Christmas. The pettiness, the sheer cruelty of it all, was laid bare for everyone to witness. Carol had stood up now, her face contorted in a mask of rage. "Turn it off! Turn that witch's lies off now!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. Mark's father tried to pull her back into her seat, his own face ashen with embarrassment. Chloe had buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. I reached the altar and took Mark's hand. He was pale, but when he looked at me, there was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, dawning understanding and a deep well of regret. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise of support. And then, the finale. The last slide appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of the $50,000 loan agreement, the terms clearly legible, with Chloe's desperate signature at the bottom. My own pre-recorded voice, calm and steady, filled the room. "For 5 years," my voiceover said, "I was called a gold digger, a charity case, and a project. All while the golden child was secretly racking up debts she couldn't pay. The truth is, the successful family you see before you was bailed out by my little computer company." This wedding, which Carol was so sure would be a tasteless, cheap affair, was paid for by the woman she tried so hard to break. That was it. The truth was out. Absolute silence fell over the chapel, broken only by Carol's guttural sob of utter defeat. She finally understood. She hadn't been outsmarted. She had been surgically dismantled with her own words and actions. Sarah, my magnificent coordinator, smoothly signaled 2 discreet security guards, who politely but firmly escorted Carol, her husband, and the weeping Chloe out of the chapel. As the doors closed behind them, I turned to the officiant, my voice clear and strong. "We're ready now. We got married that day, surrounded by people who now understood the whole story.
I didn't just gain a husband, I excised a tumour from my life. It wasn't just revenge, it was a reclamation. I had taken back my own narrative, and for the first time, I was truly, completely free.